My name is Lauridsen. I own and run a micro studio in the north of Norway called High North Studios. I'm not games or tech educated, but I have made and published an indie game, and I now run a fairly successful company, and this is my living today. I'm a solo developer. I'm the only one working full-time in the company. But the company is part of a fairly large ecosystem. So it means that it is a willing strategy that the company is quite small. Which leads me to the first thought of the day. Whenever you're doing game development, it is super important, and it was super important for me to find out what you want to do, how far, what are your goals, and then identify the level of risk that you are willing to be comfortable with, and then scale your business accordingly. For me, the worst thing I can imagine is one, my family suffering financially because of my midlife crisis. And the second thing is having employees in the company that have to get laid off because the company is not doing well. So instead, I have organized my company to be as agile as possible, as low cost as possible, because it means that I can take creative risks instead of financial risks. I come from the high north of Norway. It is literally 380,000 kilometers, 3,800 kilometers. It would take a long time to walk here, and it is arguably almost as far away from here as it is possible to get while you are still in Europe, at least in continental Europe. It is in the actual Arctic. We have extreme weather. We have darkness for 8 months of the year, literally no sun, and it is very isolated. This whole region on the top there that looks like the head of the guitar has maybe 60,000 people in it, and it is the size of many European countries. So, yeah. The nature, thankfully, is spectacular. And since it is so isolated, it is a materialistically comfortable life. The costs of living and the costs of doing business in the high north are low compared to the big cities. You also have an infinite amount of time to think about the existential dread and the eventual heat death of the universe. Now, the link to Montenegro, and the reason I am here, is that even though Norway and Montenegro are fairly different countries in many ways, there are also quite a few similarities. And one of the big similarities is that the game industry is quite fledgling in Norway, just as in Montenegro. We have neighbors who are comparatively large. Sweden's game industry is 20 times as large as Norway, and the countries are comparable in size. The reason for this is different between Norway and in Montenegro. In Norway, we have oil sickness. We are literally drowning in oil, so there is no need for innovation. This is true, unfortunately. However, putting all that aside and going back to the focus that where I live in Norway is perhaps where some people traditionally might say is the worst place in Europe almost to build a game company or to make a game from. But I disagree. And my mentality is the same as Jonas's mentality. It is critical for people like us, all of us here, to focus on the advantages afforded by the location that we are at instead of the disadvantages or the challenges. Low costs of living, once again, means that you can take creative risks instead of financial risks. Super important. And a lot of this is the same for me as for you. I could have never done what I did if I had lived in Oslo. If I had needed a large office in downtown Oslo, if I had needed 10 employees, then it becomes dangerous very, very quickly. The project. These games are all hard to play today, but some people like me are really, really old, and also a couple of other guys here. And the strange thing is that when you get to a certain age, you start missing things like this. But even for me, it's like picking up an instrument that you knew how to play in high school, but your fingers just don't work anymore. And these games are not particularly accessible. They're quite frankly difficult to play. They're difficult to get into. If you didn't play them before, then it would be almost impossible to pick a lot of these games up today. So the question is there still a market for something like this? And yes, there is. There is a small but very dedicated community dedicated to making or to playing vintage-style role-playing games. And these are all people who have made careers making role-playing games for people who are very enfranchised, like me. This is Sven Vinke, he made Baldur's Gate 3. Richard Garriott made the Ultima series, and Josh Sawyer works in Obsidian. They made a lot of legendary, Fallout New Vegas, for instance. So all legendary role-playing game designers. All of these people backed the project I am getting to on Kickstarter back in the day. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And this is when we are talking about, because this is all about passion-driven design. I chose to make a game because I missed having that game. I missed it. My heart had a hole, and I decided to fill that hole. And so when the question is there a market? The best quote I can give is actually from Josh. Players didn't abandon whatever game genre. He was saying players didn't abandon isometric RPGs. Publishers did. So the point is, there is almost an infinite number of people playing games. There is almost no limit to what you can't sell to at least someone, if you can just find them and serve them. My process, I'm not going to dwell too much on the technicals. As you can see, this is very, very niche. But my core design pillars is I wanted to make a role-playing game that felt like a role-playing game from 1992, but that was accessible to modern people. So it has, we'll go into it later. I also wanted something that evoked the feeling of playing Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s the way I did. I'm older than I look, I think. And I also wanted to do something where I blended some genres, did something with the fantasy role-playing game medium that mixed in literary influences that were not commonly used, at least not in AAA games, or at least not in a particularly good way. And that's also the beauty about making something yourself, is you get to decide. You get to be the creative director of your own project and your own life. And so the thought of the day, next thought of the day is something design pillars. Design pillars are super important. Have them from the start and stick to them if you can. I did for this project. I'm not going to talk about all the, this is not me telling you all the things I did right, but there are some things that I feel are more important than others, and something design pillars is one of those things. The process I'm not going to say too much about, but I had the idea, I made a proof of concept, something that worked. This is not news to most of you, but it is sometimes nice to be spoon-fed these things. So I made a proof of concept, something that would play. I did a small crowdfunding process. And already here is something that, it doesn't matter if you're in Montenegro or if you're in California, you can crowdfund the shit out of something sitting in this room right now. So that's a great way to get started. The crowdfunding allowed me to put more money into a vertical slice for a demo that was more substantial. And that, in turn, allowed me to start pitching to a publisher. I was super lucky, threading the eye on the needle, and I got picked up on almost my first pitch by my dream publisher, which was Raw Fury, which Jonas runs here. Raw Fury is a spectacular indie publisher to work with, and they were a real dream maker for me. So the next thought of the day is that it pays to have good luck. But good luck is also something you can plan for. That is critical to keep in mind.